Most striking was the complete stillness with which he held himself, as if motion itself might attract unwanted attention. Erin returned with a sturdy lead and a bag of treats. "Move slowly," she advised as she unlocked the kennel door. "No direct eye contact initially. Let him acknowledge you first." We entered the enclosure, Erin positioning herself near the door while I moved to the center of the small space, then lowered myself to sit cross-legged on the concrete floor. Ghost remained motionless, though the slight stiffening of his shoulders revealed his awareness of our presence. "Hey there," I said softly, keeping my voice low and even. Not the tone used for friendly pets or beloved companions, but the measured cadence I'd developed for night operations, calm, steady, unthreatening. Ghost's ear twitched slightly, but he maintained his position, back to us, eyes fixed on the wall. I didn't move closer or attempt to touch him. Instead, I simply sat, allowing my breathing to slow, deliberately unclenching the muscles that had tensed upon entering the kennel. Gradually, I shifted my focus from the dog to the sensations around me. The cool concrete beneath me, the distant sounds of other animals, the faint smell of disinfectant. Time passed. 5 minutes. Perhaps 10. Erin remained by the door, watchful but silent, respecting the unusual approach. Then, almost imperceptibly, Ghost shifted, not turning toward me, but adjusting his position so that his body was no longer directly facing the wall, a diagonal orientation that would allow peripheral awareness of my presence without direct engagement. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "He's acknowledging you," Erin whispered, surprise evident in her voice. "That's more response than we've seen with anyone." I didn't reply, maintaining the quiet stillness I'd established. Another few minutes passed before I spoke again, still in that same measured tone. "Rough days, aren't they, when the world gets too loud, too close?" Ghost's ear twitched again, more pronounced this time. "You don't have to look at me," I continued. "Sometimes it's easier not to see what's out there, safer in the corners, in the shadows." I wasn't consciously choosing my words, simply allowing thoughts to form and voice them without the usual filters, perhaps speaking as much to myself as to the dog before me. After nearly 30 minutes, Erin shifted position, the slight movement, causing a sound that seemed amplified in the quiet space. Ghost tensed immediately, his body coiling with sudden vigilance. "It's all right," I said, maintaining the same calm tone. "Just Erin. She's safe." To my surprise, and clearly to Erin's, based on her sharp intake of breath, Ghost relaxed slightly at the sound of my voice, though he maintained his guarded position. "I think that's enough for today," Erin said quietly. "This is actually incredible progress, but we shouldn't push too far in one session." I nodded, understanding the wisdom in her caution. Slowly, I rose to my feet, careful not to make sudden movements. "I'll be back tomorrow, Ghost," I said, uncertain why I felt compelled to make the promise, but knowing with absolute certainty that I would keep it. As we exited the kennel, securing the door behind us, Erin turned to me with unconcealed curiosity. "That was unexpected. Most people tried to coax him with treats or get him to engage directly. Your approach was different." I shrugged, uncomfortable with elaboration. "He's not looking for bribes or demands. He's looking for safety." She nodded slowly. "You seem to understand him." Recognize, not understand. The distinction felt important, though I couldn't have articulated why. Back at the reception area, Erin outlined the volunteer schedule and protocols, explaining that I would need to complete an orientation session before working independently with the animals. Throughout her explanation, My thoughts remained with Ghost, the German shepherd, who had withdrawn from a world that had become incomprehensible to him. "I'd like to work with him specifically," I said when she paused. "If that's possible." Erin exchanged a glance with Shannon before responding. "Normally we'd want you to have more general experience first, but given what I just witnessed..." She considered for a moment. "Let's try a specialized approach. You'll still need the basic orientation, but we could authorize supervised sessions with Ghost while you complete the regular training." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate for the opportunity she was extending. "I should be thanking you," she replied. "That's the first positive response he's shown to human interaction since arriving." She hesitated, then added more softly, "It gives him a chance." As I completed the remaining paperwork and scheduled my orientation for the following morning, I felt an unfamiliar sensation spreading through my chest, a lightness that took me a moment to identify as purpose. Dr. Winters had instructed me to find a meaningful connection. Instead, I'd found a reflection, a being as isolated by trauma as I had been. Driving home through the persistent rain, I found my thoughts unusually focused, planning tomorrow's visit with Ghost, rather than spiraling through the usual minefield of memories and regrets. For the first time in months, my mind was anchored in the future rather than chained to the past. That night, in my sparsely furnished apartment, I researched German shepherds, traumatized dogs, and rehabilitation techniques until my eyes burned from screen glare. The websites and expert opinions blurred together, but one consistent message emerged. Patience, consistency, and respect for the animal's boundaries were essential. Recovery couldn't be forced or scheduled. Just before sleep claimed me, a thought surfaced with unusual clarity. Ghost and I would either heal each other or confirm that some damage couldn't be undone. Either way, we would not be alone in the process. For the first time since returning home, I slept without nightmares. The next morning I arrived at the shelter 30 minutes before my scheduled orientation, irrationally concerned that Ghost might have somehow disappeared overnight. Shannon greeted me with surprise at my early arrival, but directed me to the break room to wait for Erin. "She just took Ghost out to the private exercise yard," Shannon explained. "First time he's allowed himself to be leashed." She thought fresh. Air might help, even in this weather. The information accelerated my pulse. Change in routine could either signify progress or trigger regression. I found myself moving toward the rear exit before consciously deciding to do so. The exercise yard was visible through a rain-streaked window in the back door. Erin stood beneath an overhang, protected somewhat from the drizzle, while Ghost explored the fenced perimeter, moving with the cautious precision of a soldier in uncertain territory. He maintained significant distance from Erin, the long lead dragging behind him, but he was moving purposefully, assessing his surroundings. I watched silently, recognizing the methodical pattern of his movement, checking boundaries, identifying potential threats, establishing mental mapping of the space. The behavior reinforced my suspicion of his training background. When Erin spotted me through the window, she motioned me out. I stepped into the gentle rain, moving slowly to join her beneath the shelter's overhang. "He's more active today," she observed, keeping her voice low. "Still won't engage directly, but he's investigating his environment. That's significant progress." I nodded, watching Ghost complete his circuit of the yard before stopping, attention fixed on something beyond the fence. His posture shifted subtly, not fear, but focused alertness. "What is he looking at?" I asked, following his sightline. "The walking trail runs along that tree line," Erin explained. "Joggers sometimes pass by. He seems particularly sensitive to men in certain types of clothing, hoodies, dark jackets, and loud voices." The profile matched common triggers for service dogs with post-traumatic stress, stimuli reminiscent of threatening scenarios from their working past. I'd seen similar reactions in military working dogs returning from deployment, their hypervigilance mirroring that of their human counterparts. "May I?" I gestured toward the yard. Erin hesitated. "We're making good progress with him being on the lead. I'm concerned about introducing too many variables at once." Her caution was professionally sound, but something in Ghost's focused stillness called to me. "I understand, but sometimes progress isn't linear." After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "Stay by the fence, initially. If he shows any signs of distress, back away slowly." I stepped from beneath the overhang, rain immediately soaking through my light jacket. Moving with deliberate calm, I made my way toward the fence line where Ghost stood vigilant, careful to approach from an angle that wouldn't block his view of whatever had captured his attention. When I reached the fence, I simply stood beside him, not looking directly at him, but sharing his outward focus. After a moment, I detected what had drawn his attention. A man in a dark raincoat, walking rapidly along the trail, phone pressed to his ear, voice carrying despite the distance as he argued with someone on the other end of the line. Ghost's body remained rigid, eyes fixed on the man, tracking his movement with military precision. "You're right to be cautious," I said quietly, water running down my face as I maintained position beside him. "Agitated humans are unpredictable, but this one's just having a bad day, not a threat to you." As if understanding my words, Ghost's posture shifted slightly, vigilance lessening fractionally as the man continued down the trail and out of sight. We stood together in the rain for several minutes more, neither touching nor making eye contact, simply occupying the same space with shared awareness. Finally, Ghost turned, not toward me but back toward the shelter, clearly indicating his desire to return inside. "Ready to go in?" I asked, moving slowly to follow as he began walking toward where Erin waited. And then it happened, so subtle it might have been missed by anyone not watching for it. Ghost angled his path slightly, bringing him closer to me as we walked. Not touching, not looking, but consciously reducing the distance he maintained, allowing me within his safety perimeter. Erin's eyes widened as she observed the adjustment. When we reached her position beneath the overhang, Ghost stopped, shaking water from his coat before standing still, waiting for guidance. "I've never seen him voluntarily approach anyone," she said quietly. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." What I was doing, I realized, was simply recognizing his experience without attempting to change or fix it. Accepting his reality rather than imposing expectations. The approach had been instinctive rather than strategic, born from my own journey, through trauma's aftermath. Over the next week, I established a routine, arriving at the shelter each morning for my official orientation sessions, then spending afternoons with Ghost. Progress came in almost imperceptible increments, Ghost maintaining slightly less distance, occasionally glancing in my direction, though still avoiding direct eye contact, accepting food from his bowl while I sat quietly nearby. Other volunteers and staff noted the changes with varying degrees of surprise and curiosity. I overheard whispered conversations questioning my methods, which involved minimal interaction by conventional standards. I spent hours simply sitting near Ghost, sometimes reading aloud from whatever book I'd brought, other times in complete silence. "You're building trust through presence," Dr. Winters observed during our weekly session when I described my shelter. "Work, creating safety through consistency without demands, exactly what you needed when you first returned." Her parallel wasn't subtle, but it was accurate. I had instinctively offered Ghost what I had desperately needed and rarely received, space to exist without expectation of immediate recovery. On the 10th day, as rain finally gave way to watery sunshine, the moment I had unconsciously been working toward arrived without fanfare, I sat on the ground in the exercise yard, back against the fence, reading aloud from Call of the Wild, London's descriptions of a dog navigating between wilderness and civilization, seeming appropriate for our sessions. Ghost had been moving around the perimeter, maintaining his usual awareness of our surroundings. Without particular ceremony, he completed his circuit, and then, instead of keeping his customary distance, he approached where I sat and lowered himself to the ground, approximately 3 feet away. I continued reading, maintaining the rhythm of my voice despite the acceleration of my pulse. After a few minutes, Ghost shifted position, decreasing the gap between us by another foot. Then, in a movement so deliberate it could not be misinterpreted, he turned his head and met my gaze directly for the first time. The moment stretched between us, a bridge forming across species and experience. His eyes were amber, clear and intelligent, holding neither fear nor aggression, but a cautious evaluation. I returned his gaze steadily, allowing him to see whatever he needed to see in mine. After several seconds, Ghost lowered his head to rest. On his paws, maintaining his position near me, his body language communicating not submission, but a tentative acceptance of connection. "I see you too," I said quietly, setting the book aside. From the shelter doorway where she had been observing, Erin's voice carried across the yard, thick with emotion. "Michael, do you have any idea what you just accomplished?" I didn't look up, unwilling to break this fragile new understanding between Ghost and myself. "He was ready," I replied simply. "No," she countered, approaching slowly to avoid disturbing the moment. "You have to understand, this is extraordinary. He's not just tolerating proximity, he's choosing engagement. In rescue work, we see all kinds of trauma responses, but what you've achieved in less than 2 weeks." She trailed off, and when I finally glanced in her direction, I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "You've given him back the possibility of trust," she finished softly. The words landed with unexpected weight, stirring something long dormant within my chest. If Ghost could find his way back from such profound withdrawal, could I not do the same? If he could risk connection after witnessing humanity at its darkest, what excuse remained for my continued isolation? As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the exercise yard, I made a decision that would alter not just Ghost's future, but my own. "I want to foster him," I said to Erin as we prepared to lead Ghost back inside. "If you think he's ready and if I qualify," her expression shifted from surprise to thoughtful consideration. "Our foster program typically requires more experience, but this is clearly an exceptional case." She watched as Ghost willingly accepted the lead, walking closer to my side than he had previously permitted. "There's still a long road ahead. For his rehabilitation, you understand." "I do. Better than she could know. You'd need a home visit, supply preparation, ongoing support check-ins." "Whatever is necessary," I affirmed. The logistics didn't concern me, the commitment did. For the first time since returning to civilian life, I was voluntarily assuming responsibility for another living being, acknowledging my capacity to provide care rather than just receive it. As we returned Ghost to his kennel for the night, he did something unprecedented. He turned at the entrance, looking back at me as if confirming I would return. The simple gesture, evidence of newly forming attachment, filled me with equal parts terror and determination. "I'll be back tomorrow," I promised, the words a covenant between survivors. That night, researching foster requirements and preparing my apartment for potential inspection, I realized Dr. Winter's assignment had led to an outcome neither of us could have anticipated. In seeking connection outside veteran circles, I had found not just purpose but reflection, a kindred spirit navigating the aftermath of experiences that defied conventional understanding. Ghost and I had recognized something essential in each other, the shadow cast by trauma, yes, but also the stubborn persistence of life beneath it. The capacity, however damaged, to begin again. The home inspection was scheduled for Friday afternoon. For 3 days, I worked to transform my apartment from a Spartan refuge into a space suitable for canine rehabilitation. I installed baby gates to create safe boundaries, purchased appropriate bedding, researched and acquired the specific food Erin recommended for Ghost's nutritional needs. Each preparation was an act of commitment, a tangible statement of intent that resonated beyond the immediate task. My apartment had never felt like home, merely a place where I slept and stored the few possessions I'd accumulated since discharge. The walls remained bare, the furniture minimal and functional. I had existed in the space without inhabiting it, much as I had moved through the world without engaging it. Now, reorganizing to accommodate Ghost's needs, I found myself considering color and comfort for the first time. "You're nesting," Dr. Winters observed when I described my preparations during our session. "Creating home rather than just shelter. That's significant progress." I didn't tell her how frequently I had second-guessed my decision, how often doubt had crept in during late hours. Was I genuinely capable of providing what Ghost needed? Or was this merely another form of avoidance, focusing on another's trauma, to escape confronting my own? Erin arrived promptly at 2, clipboard in hand, her expression professionally neutral despite the unusual circumstances. Standard protocol didn't include fostering to first-time volunteers, particularly with cases as challenging as Ghost's. The exception being made spoke to both the dog's unexpected response to me and the shelter's limited options for his rehabilitation. "I'll need to check that the space is secure, that potentially dangerous items are inaccessible, and that you have appropriate supplies for his care," she explained, as I welcomed her inside. I nodded, stepping back to allow her full access to the apartment. She moved methodically through each room, noting the newly installed gates, the designated sleeping area, the secured cabinets containing cleaning supplies and medications. "You've been thorough," she commented, checking items off her list. Most first-time fosters miss details like covering electrical cords or securing trash containers. The military had instilled in me an attention to detail that transferred well to this new mission. I had approached Ghost's arrival with the same careful planning once applied to operations in hostile territory, assessing risks, establishing contingencies, leaving nothing to chance that could be reasonably anticipated. "What about your work schedule?" Erin asked, completing her inspection. Ghost shouldn't be left alone for extended periods initially. His separation anxiety could trigger regression. "I'm on medical leave," I replied, the partial truth easier than a complete explanation of my employment situation. "I work part-time at a veteran-owned hardware store, but the owner is flexible with scheduling." Another recent development: a job secured through a VA employment program 3 days weekly, primarily restocking and inventory management. Limited customer interaction, structured tasks, manageable expectations. Erin nodded, making final notes on her clipboard. "Based on my assessment, your home meets foster requirements. There are still some concerns about the unique nature of this placement, but..." She paused, setting down her clipboard. "Sometimes standard protocols don't serve individual needs. Ghost has shown more progress with you in 2 weeks than with our entire staff in 2 months." She removed several documents from her folder, placing them on my kitchen counter. These forms outline the foster agreement, veterinary protocols, emergency contacts, and scheduled check-ins. The shelter provides food, basic medical care, and behavioral support. As foster parent, you commit to continuing his rehabilitation program and bringing him to scheduled assessments. I reviewed the documents carefully, the familiar bureaucratic language oddly comforting in its clarity. Responsibilities defined, expectations established, parameters set. Within these boundaries, Ghost and I would navigate our shared recovery. "When can he come home?" I asked, signing the final form. The question hung between us, its significance extending beyond the immediate logistics. Home, a concept that had become abstract during deployments and remained elusive since return. "Tomorrow morning," Erin replied. "We'll need time to prepare his medications and supplies. And Michael." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "This won't be linear. There will be setbacks, days when it feels like you've lost ground. That's normal in trauma recovery." I nodded, recognizing her concern extended to both Ghost and myself. "I understand." "I believe you do," she said quietly. "That's why I'm supporting this placement despite its unconventional nature." After Erin left, I made final adjustments to the apartment, positioning Ghost's bed where it would provide both security and sightlines to main living areas, establishing a quiet corner with minimal stimulation for high-stress periods, ensuring water was accessible throughout the space. The practical tasks anchored me against growing anticipation and anxiety. That night, sleep proved elusive. I found myself mentally reviewing contingencies, preparing for various scenarios Ghost's arrival might present. The planning wasn't merely for the dog's benefit. The structured thinking provided relief from the fragmentary memories and intrusive thoughts that typically populated my sleepless hours. Morning arrived with uncharacteristic clarity. I reached the shelter 15 minutes before opening, waiting in my truck until staff arrived. Shannon smiled knowingly when I entered, gesturing toward the back. "Erin's getting him ready. She said to send you back when you arrived." I found them in the examination room, Erin kneeling beside Ghost as a veterinary technician reviewed. Final instructions. Ghost was wearing a new harness, more substantial than the basic lead used during our yard sessions. His attention shifted immediately when I entered, his posture straightening with recognition. "Final checkup shows he's physically healthy, aside from the remaining weight gain needed," Erin explained, standing to greet me. "Dr. Marin has prescribed continuing the anti-anxiety medication for at least 30 days, with gradual reduction based on behavioral assessment." The technician handed me a folder containing medical records and medication instructions. "He'll need to revisit in 2 weeks for follow-up. Call immediately if you observe any changes in appetite, elimination patterns, or sleep behaviors." I accepted the information with appropriate solemnity, though my attention remained primarily on Ghost, who had maintained steady focus on my presence since I entered. "Ready to go home, Ghost?" I asked, using the same calm tone established during our sessions. At the sound of my voice, his ears perked forward, a subtle but unmistakable response. Erin handed me his leash, our fingers briefly touching in the exchange, a moment of human connection in parallel to the developing bond with Ghost. "Remember, day 1 is observation only," she instructed. "Let him explore at his own pace. Maintain routines as consistently as possible. And call me, anytime, for any reason." I nodded, accepting both the practical guidance and the underlying support it represented. Ghost stood as I took the leash, moving to position himself at my left side without prompting. Shannon met us at the reception area, tears glistening despite her smile. "We're all rooting for you two," she said, bending to Ghost's eye level. "You hit the jackpot, buddy. Don't forget your shelter family." The drive home proceeded with surprising calm. Ghost sat alertly in the passenger seat, secured with a special harness Erin had provided. He divided his attention between the passing landscape and occasional glances in my direction, as if confirming my continued presence. "Almost there," I told him as we approached my apartment complex. "It's not much, but it's quiet. Few neighbors, minimal traffic, good territory for reconditioning." Speaking aloud to Ghost had become natural during our shelter sessions, the one-sided conversations flowing more easily than any human interaction since my return. There was liberation in communication without expectation of conventional response, in being heard without being judged. The apartment building came into view, a modest two-story structure on the outskirts of town, bordered by undeveloped woodland on one side. I had selected it specifically for its isolation, the limited neighborly interaction, a feature rather than drawback during my early civilian transition. Ghost's attention focused sharply as we parked, his body tensing slightly with the anticipation of new territory. I allowed him to take his time exiting the vehicle, neither rushing nor restraining his cautious assessment of the surroundings. "We'll do a perimeter check first," I explained, using the specific terminology intentionally. "Establish boundaries and identify potential variables." We moved methodically around the building's exterior, Ghost cataloging scents and sounds. With military precision, his training background was evident in how he processed environmental data, thorough but efficient, prioritizing strategic awareness over random exploration. When we finally entered the apartment, I unclipped his leash just inside the door, allowing him unrestricted movement within the prepared space. He began a systematic inspection that mirrored our exterior circuit, moving room to room with focused intention. I remained near the entrance, neither following nor directing his investigation. Giving him agency in this initial assessment felt crucial, establishing from the outset that this territory was shared rather than dominated. Ghost completed his circuit in approximately 10 minutes, returning to where I still stood by the door. He made brief eye contact before moving to the water bowl I had positioned in the kitchen, drinking deeply before settling on the living room rug, body oriented to maintain sightlines to both me and the front door. "Good choice," I commented, moving slowly to sit on the sofa, best tactical position in the apartment. For the remainder of that first day, we established a pattern of quiet coexistence. Ghost alternated between alert observation and brief periods of rest, never fully relaxing, but gradually adjusting to the new environment. I maintained proximity without pressure, reading aloud occasionally, as we had during shelter sessions, providing continuity between past and present circumstances. By evening, he had accepted food from my hand, a milestone Erin had suggested might take days rather than hours. The moment felt significant but fragile, a tentative trust that required continued reinforcement. Night presented the first major challenge. As darkness fell, Ghost's vigilance intensified. He began pacing between windows, checking entry points with increasing frequency. The behavior was familiar, the heightened alertness I had experienced during countless nights after returning home, when darkness transformed ordinary shadows into potential threats. Instead of attempting to stop his patrol, I joined it, moving through the apartment in parallel to his circuit, checking each window and door before acknowledging its security. "Perimeter secure," I stated after we had completed the cycle together. "Rest is authorized." Whether responding to my words or simply exhausting his immediate vigilance needs, Ghost returned to his bed in the living room. I positioned my recliner nearby, prepared for a night of interrupted sleep. True recovery wouldn't come quickly for either of us. I woke at 2:17 a.m., momentarily disoriented by the weight against my leg. Ghost had moved from his bed to the floor beside my recliner, not touching me directly, but positioned close enough that his body pressed lightly against the chair's edge. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, watchful but calm. "You're okay," I said. Softly, "We both are." The simple affirmation, spoken as much for myself as for him, settled between us like a pact. We remained that way until morning light filtered through the blinds, neither fully asleep nor completely vigilant, but sharing the burden of awareness that trauma had conditioned into both our nervous systems. Our first week established routines that provided structure for both Ghost's rehabilitation and my own reintegration. Mornings began with a perimeter check of the apartment complex, followed by breakfast and basic obedience work that reinforced Ghost's training background while building our communication. The German Shepherd's professional history became increasingly evident through his responses to specific commands. He recognized tactical positioning terms, responded to hand signals, and demonstrated the hyper-awareness characteristic of service animals trained for protection or detection work. Yet these abilities existed alongside profound emotional damage. Sudden noises could trigger immediate withdrawal, certain male voices caused visible distress, and thunderstorms induced trembling that no amount of reassurance could fully calm. Erin visited on the 4th day, her professional assessment combining with personal investment in Ghost's progress. "The physical improvement is remarkable," she noted, observing his coat's increased luster and more alert posture. "He's maintaining better hydration, and his muscle tone is already improving, but most significantly, he's displaying appropriate attachment behaviors." She watched as Ghost periodically checked my location throughout her visit, always maintaining awareness of my position in the room. "He's bonding," she explained. "Not just tolerating human presence, but actively forming connection. That's extraordinary given his history." What she didn't articulate, but what I understood implicitly, was that Ghost's capacity for renewed trust represented hope for my own recovery as well. If trauma hadn't permanently destroyed his ability to form attachments, perhaps mine remained, similarly intact beneath layers of protective withdrawal. On the 6th day, we ventured beyond the apartment complex for the first time, walking a quiet trail that bordered a small stream. Ghost demonstrated the environmental hypervigilance typical of combat veterans and service animals with similar conditioning. Constantly scanning for potential threats, categorizing stimuli, maintaining tactical awareness. Yet alongside this heightened alertness, he began showing brief moments of typical canine behavior, pausing to investigate particularly interesting scents, occasionally watching birds with focused curiosity. These small windows of ordinary dog behavior were victories, more significant than his compliance with commands or routines. They represented capacity for life beyond trauma's constraints, for experiences unclouded by hypervigilance. "Look at that," I said quietly as Ghost briefly pawed at a fallen log, investigating some unseen creature's trail. "You remember how to be curious." The moment passed quickly, vigilance reasserting itself as a jogger approached on the path ahead. But it had existed, a glimpse of the animal beneath the conditioning and trauma, still capable of engagement with the world beyond. Threat assessment. Dr. Winters observed similar patterns in my own behavior during our weekly session. "You mentioned buying plants for your apartment," she noted, referencing a casual comment I had made about changes to my living space. "That's future-oriented thinking. Investing in something that requires ongoing care, that grows and changes over time." I hadn't considered the significance of the small succulents now positioned near my living room window. They had been an impulsive purchase during a supply run for Ghost's food, simple desert plants requiring minimal maintenance but adding unexpected color to the previously utilitarian space. "I suppose it is," I acknowledged, "and you've increased community connections, regular interactions with shelter staff, with employees at the pet supply store, with neighbors you encounter during Ghost's walks." Again, these developments had occurred almost without conscious intention, practical necessities of Ghost's care rather than deliberate social engagement. Yet their cumulative effect was undeniable, gradually expanding my world beyond the isolated existence I had constructed since returning home. On the 10th day, Ghost initiated physical contact for the first time. We had settled in our evening positions, myself on the couch reviewing training materials Erin had provided, Ghost on his bed nearby. Without particular ceremony, he rose. across the short distance between us and positioned himself directly against the couch, his shoulder pressing lightly against my leg. The contact was minimal but deliberate, not accidental or necessitated by space constraints, but intentionally established. I continued reading, allowing him to maintain the connection without drawing attention to its significance. Touch without demand or expectation, freely offered after thoughtful consideration. I found myself unexpectedly emotional in response to this simple gesture of trust. For months after returning home, I had avoided physical contact whenever possible, the casual touches of civilian life overwhelming after the heightened sensory experiences of combat zones. Like Ghost, I had maintained careful perimeters, controlled distances that preserved psychological boundaries when physical ones felt threatened. This quiet moment of connection, dog fur warm against denim, represented mutual progress more profound than any training milestone or behavioral improvement. It acknowledged shared territory beyond physical space, the complex landscape of post-traumatic existence where hypervigilance coexisted with hunger for genuine connection. "Thank you," I said softly, briefly resting my hand on his back. He accepted the touch without flinching, further evidence of developing trust. We remained that way until bedtime, the physical connection between us a bridge across species and experience, wordlessly affirming what we were beginning to understand. Recovery was a path best traveled together. The 2-week veterinary follow-up arrived with a mixture of progress and continued challenges. Ghost had gained appropriate weight, his coat showing marked improvement in texture and luster. Physical reactions to medication were minimal, his body tolerating the prescribed anti-anxiety treatment without apparent side effects. Behaviorally, assessment was more complex. While he had formed clear attachment to me, his responses to other humans remained guarded and inconsistent. Dr. Marin observed his reactions carefully, noting both improvements and ongoing concerns. "He's showing appropriate bonding with his primary caregiver," she explained, using the clinical terminology that somehow failed to capture the depth of connection developing between us. But generalization to other humans remains limited. He tolerates proximity but avoids engagement. With strangers, the assessment felt uncomfortably familiar, mirroring evaluations in my own treatment records, capable of function but not integration, present but not connected, surviving rather than living. The goal isn't necessarily complete socialization, Dr. Marin continued, perhaps sensing my discomfort with the parallel. For some trauma cases, success means a stable, specialized placement rather than universal adaptability. Ghost may always require a more controlled environment than typical companion animals. Her words offered unexpected reassurance. Recovery didn't demand conformity to standardized expectations, not for Ghost, and by extension, not for me. Success could be measured in terms of specific connections rather than general functioning, in quality of engagement rather than quantity of interactions. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Marin offered a final observation that lingered with me long after. The appointment concluded. "The improvement in his eye contact is remarkable," she noted. "Initial assessments documented complete avoidance, but he now maintains appropriate visual connection with you during interactions. That represents fundamental neurological rewiring, the brain literally creating new pathways for trust." New pathways for trust. The phrase echoed in my thoughts during our drive home, crystallizing something essential about Ghost's journey, and perhaps my own. Recovery wasn't about returning to some hypothetical pre-trauma state, but about forging new connections, establishing alternative routes when original pathways had been damaged beyond repair. That evening, As Ghost and I completed our customary perimeter check before settling in for the night, I found myself considering how our shared rituals had evolved. What had begun as accommodation of trauma-induced hypervigilance had transformed into something more nuanced, acknowledgement of genuine security needs while gradually introducing elements of normalcy and even pleasure. Our circuit now included brief training intervals, moments of play with a ball Ghost had unexpectedly shown interest in, and occasional treats at predictable checkpoints. The structure remained, providing essential continuity, but within that framework, new experiences had been carefully integrated. Progress isn't linear, Erin had warned during her most recent visit. There will be setbacks, reactions that seem like regression. The important thing is the overall trajectory. Her caution proved prescient the following day when an unexpected construction project began at the building adjacent to our apartment complex. The sudden intrusion of heavy machinery, hydraulic hammers breaking concrete, diesel engines revving, workers shouting over the din, shattered the controlled environment we had carefully established. Ghost's reaction was immediate and severe. He retreated to the farthest corner of the bedroom closet, wedging himself between wall and dresser, body trembling violently despite my attempts at reassurance. When I reached toward him, he didn't growl or snap, responses that might actually have indicated healthier self-protection, but instead pressed himself further into the corner, eyes unfocused, respiration rapid and shallow. The behavioral regression was heartbreaking to witness after weeks of careful progress. More disturbing was my own parallel response. The construction noise had triggered my hypervigilance as well, heart racing as mechanized sounds, too similar to combat environments, overwhelmed rational assessment. We were both in fight or flight, neurological systems flooded with stress hormones, higher cognitive functions overshadowed by primitive survival responses. The difference was my awareness of what was happening, the metacognition that allowed me to recognize the physical response, while maintaining perspective on its cause. Acting on instinct rather than training protocols, I positioned myself beside Ghost in the closet, not touching or demanding response, simply sharing his retreat. I began the breathing exercises Dr. Winters had taught for managing anxiety attacks. Slow, deliberate inhales and extended exhales, gradually reducing physiological arousal through controlled respiration. "We're safe," I told Ghost between measured breaths. "This is now, not then. Different place, different time." The words were as much self-direction as canine reassurance. Slowly, my own heart rate decreased, muscle tension eased, rational thought regained precedence over instinctual reaction. Ghost's trembling continued, but gradually lessened in intensity as he registered my calming presence beside him. We remained in the closet for nearly 3 hours, Ghost eventually shifting to lean against my leg, seeking contact he had previously avoided during stress responses. When the construction noise finally ceased at day's end, we emerged physically exhausted, but having discovered important new territory in our shared recovery, the capacity to weather acute stress triggers together, finding stability in mutual presence when external circumstances became overwhelming. That night, Ghost slept pressed against my bedroom door, positioned as if guarding against further intrusion. I found myself oddly comforted by his protective stance, not because I needed defense from actual threat, but because it represented appropriate response rather than dissociative withdrawal. He was engaging with the world, however imperfectly, rather than retreating from it entirely. The construction continued for 4 days, each slightly easier than the last, as we developed adaptive strategies, playing recorded nature sounds to mask the worst of the mechanical noise, establishing a safe room in the bathroom where acoustic tiles dampened external sounds, adjusting our walking schedule to be absent during peak construction hours. By the final day, Ghost was able to Maintain relative calm throughout brief periods of moderate noise, regaining equilibrium more quickly after stress responses. That's resilience developing, Erin observed during her weekly check-in. Not absence of reaction, but faster recovery from it. The nervous system learning it can return to baseline after activation. The setback and subsequent adaptation taught me something crucial about Ghost's rehabilitation, and by extension, about trauma recovery generally. Progress wasn't measured by elimination of triggers or responses, but by developing capacity to navigate them without becoming defined by them. The goal wasn't a dog who never experienced fear, but one who could process fear without being paralyzed by it. As our third week together concluded, Ghost displayed a behavior that symbolized our journey more powerfully than any clinical assessment could capture. During our evening walk, a car backfired loudly, approximately 50 yards from our position on the trail. Ghost startled visibly, body tensing, eyes instantly scanning for threat sources. But instead of freezing or bolting, his previous pattern when confronted with sudden loud noises, he quickly looked to me, establishing eye contact. The communication in that glance was unmistakable. Is this danger? Should we respond? I maintained. Calm posture, kept breathing steady and spoke quietly. Just a car, we're okay. Ghost held my gaze for a moment longer, then deliberately relaxed his stance, returning to normal walking position beside me. He had experienced fear, but consulted trusted guidance before determining his response. He had, in that moment, reclaimed choice where trauma had previously permitted only reaction. Watching him resume our walk with cautious confidence, I recognized the profound gift in our parallel journeys. We were teaching each other that survival meant more than endless vigilance against potential threats. It meant creating space for trust amid uncertainty, for connection despite vulnerability, for moments of genuine presence in a world that would never be entirely safe. Good boy, I said, the simple praise carrying deeper meaning than its conventional usage. Good for fighting your way back, good for choosing trust over fear, good for showing me the path. Ghost briefly pressed against my leg as we walked, acknowledgement rather than dependence. Together, step by step, we continued forward. 1 month into fostering Ghost, I received an unexpected call from Dr. Winter's office. Her assistant explained that she had been hospitalized with pneumonia and would be unavailable for our regular sessions for at least 3 weeks. They offered to reschedule with another therapist in the practice, but the thought of explaining my history to someone new felt exhausting rather than helpful. I'll wait for Dr. Winters to return, I decided, thanking the assistant for the information. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, considering the implications. Weekly therapy had been a non-negotiable condition of my medical discharge, a requirement I had initially resented but gradually come to value. The sudden interruption of this routine should have triggered anxiety. Instead, I found myself experiencing a strange calm as I watched Ghost methodically chew his breakfast in the corner. Our daily structure had become a form of therapy itself. The consistent routines, the gradual introduction of new experiences, the careful balance between challenge and security. Ghost's needs had become the framework around which I built functional days, his progress providing measurable evidence that healing, however incremental, was possible. Looks like it's just us for a while, I told him as he finished eating and approached for his customary post-breakfast check-in. A brief moment of eye contact that had become part of our morning ritual. We should probably expand your socialization training. The shelter's behavioral plan for Ghost included gradual exposure to different environments and people, carefully managed to build confidence without overwhelming his still fragile coping mechanisms. So far, we had focused primarily on physical rehabilitation and basic trust building, limiting our excursions to quiet trails and unpopulated areas. With 3 unstructured weeks ahead, it seemed an appropriate time to begin more deliberate socialization work. I consulted the training materials Erin had provided, reviewing recommended approaches for dogs with traumatic backgrounds. The guidance emphasized controlled exposure, positive associations, and recognizing subtle stress signals before they escalated to full reactions. That afternoon, I called Erin to discuss adjusting Ghost's rehabilitation plan. "That actually aligns with what I was going to suggest at our next check-in," she said after hearing my thoughts. "His physical condition has stabilized, and the attachment bond with you is secure. Controlled socialization is the logical next step." We developed a gradual exposure schedule, starting with brief visits to quiet public spaces during off-peak hours, then incrementally increasing duration and complexity of social environments. Each exposure would be paired with positive experiences to build associations between new situations and safety rather than stress. "The goal isn't to create a social butterfly," Erin emphasized. "It's to expand his comfort zone enough that necessary interactions don't trigger crisis responses. Think functional rather than conventional." The distinction resonated deeply. Functional rather than conventional. The same realistic standard that had begun to shape my own recovery expectations, not returning to some idealized normal that had never truly existed, but building capacity for meaningful engagement within. Sustainable boundaries. We began the next morning with a brief visit to a small neighborhood park at 6:30 a.m., when few people would be present. Ghost remained on leash, harness securely fastened as we walked the perimeter. His body language showed alertness, but not alarm, ears forward, posture vigilant but not rigid. Occasional glances toward me for reassurance. 2 elderly men were playing chess at a concrete table near the center of the park, their quiet conversation barely audible as we passed. Ghost noticed them immediately, tracking their movements while maintaining pace beside me. When one man laughed suddenly, Ghost startled slightly but recovered without breaking stride, a marked improvement from the shutdown responses such unexpected sounds had triggered weeks earlier. "Good boy," I murmured, offering a small training treat from my pocket. Association building, unexpected noise followed by reward and continued safety, gradually rewriting neural patterns that had linked sudden sounds with danger. We completed 2 circuits of the park before returning home, keeping the first exposure brief and successful. Ghost's demeanor remained calm throughout, though his relief upon returning to familiar territory was evident in his immediate drink of water and settling onto his bed for a sustained rest. Over the next week, we gradually expanded our socialization efforts, visiting the park at slightly busier times, walking the perimeter of a school playground during weekend hours, sitting outside a quiet cafe where I could purchase coffee to go while Ghost practiced maintaining calm in the presence of strangers at a comfortable distance. Each outing followed the same careful protocol. Begin with a thorough exercise session at home to reduce baseline energy and anxiety. Approach new environments gradually, allowing Ghost to observe from a distance before entering. Maintain vigilant. Attention to his stress signals. Elevated respiration, muscle tension, ear position changes, and withdraw before mild stress escalated to distress. Pair each successful exposure with appropriate rewards, food treats initially, then transitioning. To praise and brief play as external rewards became less necessary. Ghost's progress wasn't linear. Some days, he handled moderate activity with remarkable composure, while other days, similar or even lesser challenges triggered stronger reactions. Weather changes, sleep quality, and seemingly random fluctuations in his internal state all affected his resilience on any given day. Just like humans, Dr. Moran commented during our monthly checkup, trauma responses aren't perfectly predictable. Some days the nervous system has more bandwidth for processing potential threats than others. The inconsistency could have been frustrating, but instead I found it oddly validating. The parallels between Ghost's recovery journey and my own made his occasional setbacks easier to accept. If I could recognize that his struggling days weren't failures, but natural variations in a complex healing process, perhaps I could extend the same understanding to my own difficult periods. During our third week of expanded socialization, we experienced a breakthrough that neither training manuals nor professional guidance had prepared me for. We had begun visiting a small dog park during off hours, not yet interacting with other dogs, but simply habituating Ghost to their distant presence. On this particular morning, the park was empty when we arrived, allowing Ghost to explore the fenced area without immediate social pressure. Approximately 15 minutes into our visit, a woman arrived with an elderly golden retriever moving slowly beside her. Following protocol, I prepared to create distance, calling Ghost to heel position while assessing his stress signals. To my surprise, he showed minimal reaction. Alert observation, but no tension increase, no stress panting, no displacement behaviors. The woman approached the fence but remained outside, respecting the space we had established. "Mind if we join? You?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Buddy here is too old for rough play. We just come for the smells and a change of scenery." I hesitated, evaluating Ghost's continued calm. "My dog is in rehabilitation," I explained, the standard phrase Erin had suggested for public interactions. "He's still learning appropriate social behavior." She nodded, understanding. "Buddy's good with nervous dogs. He ignores them completely unless they approach him. Former therapy dog before arthritis retired him." Something about the old retriever's calm demeanor and the woman's matter-of-fact acceptance of boundaries made me consider deviating from our planned progression. Ghost had been showing steady improvement, and a single, controlled interaction with an exceptionally stable dog might provide valuable assessment data. "We can try," I decided, "but I may need to separate them immediately if I see stress signals." "Of course," she agreed easily. "Buddy won't mind either way." She entered with her dog, maintaining significant distance as she closed the gate behind them. Buddy indeed seemed wholly uninterested in our presence, immediately beginning a slow, methodical sniffing circuit of nearby bushes. Ghost watched intently, but remained in heel position beside me, body alert but not tense. We maintained separate areas of the park for nearly 10 minutes, allowing both dogs to become accustomed to the other's presence without direct interaction. Then, without apparent intention, their separate exploration patterns brought them gradually closer together. I watched Ghost carefully for signs of increasing stress, hackles raising, freezing posture, direct staring, but saw only curiosity in his gradually relaxing ears and softening gaze. When they finally came within approximately 5 feet of each other, both dogs engaged in appropriate greeting behaviors. Indirect approach, curved body language, casual glances rather than confrontational staring. The interaction that followed was brief but profoundly significant. Buddy offered a standard canine greeting, sniffing politely, before simply standing nearby with the placid disinterest of elderly dogs. Ghost completed his own cautious investigation, then, remarkably, initiated a play-boo, the universal canine invitation that I had never witnessed him attempt before. Buddy responded with the minimal participation his arthritis allowed, a token paw lift and head tilt that acknowledged the invitation without accepting it fully. The exchange lasted perhaps 30 seconds before both dogs disengaged naturally, returning to individual exploration. "Would you look at that?" the woman commented quietly. "Your boy has good manners beneath his nervousness." The simple observation struck me deeply. Good manners beneath nervousness. The fundamental character, intact despite trauma's overlay. The essential self preserved even when obscured by protective adaptations. That brief, seemingly ordinary dog park interaction represented something extraordinary in Ghost's recovery journey. Not just tolerance of another being's presence, but voluntary engagement, appropriate social communication, the remembering of healthy patterns beneath trauma's rewiring. I thanked the woman before leaving, explaining more fully Ghost's background and the significance of what we had witnessed. "Buddy was my husband's dog," she shared in response. "After John died 3 years ago, Buddy stopped playing completely, wouldn't touch toys, wouldn't engage with other dogs. The vet said it was grief." She smiled softly at her elderly companion. "Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it does teach us how to carry them differently." The chance encounter and her parting wisdom lingered with me throughout the day, prompting reflection on Ghost's progress, and by extension, my own. Neither of us would ever be who we were before trauma altered our paths. The goal couldn't be erasing those experiences or their impacts, but rather integrating them into new versions of ourselves, versions that contained both the damage and the healing, the loss, and the rebuilding. That evening, I received a call from Erin with unexpected news. "We've been contacted by a military working dog program," she explained, her voice carrying barely contained excitement. "One of their trained handlers saw the social media post about Ghost's progress and recognized some of his behaviors from the photos. The social media post in question had been a simple update on the shelter's page, showing Ghost's physical transformation from his arrival condition to current health. I had permitted it with the understanding that his location and specific circumstances would remain private. They believed Ghost might be Ajax, a specialized detection dog who went missing during a training exercise near the Oregon-Washington border approximately 4 months ago, Erin continued. "The timing and physical characteristics match, and his responses to specific commands you've reported are consistent with their training protocols." The information landed with complex impact. On one hand, confirmation of Ghost's background could provide valuable insight for his ongoing rehabilitation. On the other, it raised uncomfortable questions about his future placement. Military working dogs were government property, their recovery a matter of protocol rather than emotional consideration. "What does this mean for his foster placement?" I asked, the question heavy with unspoken concerns. "That's why I'm calling," Erin replied. "They've requested a meeting to assess whether he is indeed their missing dog. If confirmed, there would be discussions about appropriate next steps, considering his traumatic experience and current rehabilitation status." My chest tightened at the implication that Ghost could be reclaimed, returned to service, or reassigned, based on organizational needs rather than his healing progress. The possibility hadn't occurred to me during our weeks together, my focus entirely on his rehabilitation rather than questions of permanent placement. When would this meeting take place? I managed to keep my voice steady, despite the sudden anxiety churning beneath it. "They've proposed this Friday. A handler would come to evaluate Ghost in familiar surroundings. Your apartment, if you're comfortable with that. No pressure for immediate decisions, just assessment at this stage." I agreed to the meeting while internally processing the unexpected development. That night, watching Ghost sleep in his now customary position near my bedroom door, I confronted emotions I had been carefully avoiding. Attachment, possession, fear of loss. The foster arrangement had always been technically temporary, but somewhere in the shared routines and parallel healing, Ghost had become more than a rehabilitation project. He had become my anchor to the present, my bridge back to meaningful connection. The prospect of losing him reactivated familiar patterns of anticipated abandonment, the expectation that anything good would eventually be taken away. One day at a time, I reminded myself, echoing Dr. Winter's frequent refrain. Focus on what could be addressed today, rather than borrowing tomorrow's uncertainties. Friday arrived with grey skies and intermittent rain, appropriate backdrop to my unsettled mood. Ghost seemed to sense the tension, staying closer than usual. During our morning routine, his attention frequently returning to my face, as if gauging emotional cues. The military representative arrived precisely at the scheduled time. A woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Lieutenant Sarah Calloway, K-9 training specialist. Her handshake was firm, her demeanor professional, but not cold. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," she said, as I invited her inside. "I understand this must feel intrusive after all the progress you've made with him." The acknowledgement of emotional reality beneath official procedure immediately eased some of my tension. Lieutenant Calloway was not merely a bureaucratic representative, but someone who understood the complexities of the situation. Ghost had positioned himself in the living room, alert but not anxious, watching the newcomer with appropriate caution but no visible distress, itself evidence of how far he had progressed. From the shutdown dog who had refused to acknowledge human presence at the shelter. "May I approach him?" Calloway asked, remaining near the entryway. "Yes, but directly is better than from the side. He's still reactive to peripheral approaches." She nodded, appreciating the specific guidance, and moved toward Ghost with calm, deliberate steps. When she reached approximately 5 feet distance, she stopped and lowered herself to a crouch, reducing her physical presence. "Let's see if he remembers protocol," she said quietly, then issued a command in what sounded like Dutch, a language commonly used in military and police K-9 training to ensure commands aren't confused with casual conversation. Ghost's reaction was immediate and unambiguous. His posture shifted from casual observation to alert attention, ears forward, body straightening with recognition. Calloway issued another command, different from the first. Ghost immediately performed a specific position change, not a standard sit or down, but a specialized posture clearly associated with his trained responses. A third command, and Ghost approached Calloway directly, performing a precise behavioral sequence that could only have been learned through specialized training. "That confirms it," she said softly. "This is definitely Ajax. The name hung in the air between us. Ajax, not Ghost. A different identity, a different history, a different set of expectations and purposes. Ghost, or Ajax, looked between us, clearly sensing the significance of the exchange, but unable to comprehend its implications for his future. "What happens now?" I asked, the question encompassing more complex concerns than its simple wording suggested. Lieutenant Calloway stood slowly, maintaining respectful distance from Ghost even after confirming his identity. "That's actually more complicated than you might expect," she replied. "Ajax disappeared during a training accident. The handler working with him was seriously injured when their vehicle overturned on a rural road during a storm. Ajax was thrown from the vehicle and fled the scene before backup arrived." She glanced at Ghost with professional assessment. Based on his condition when found and behavior afterward, he likely witnessed his handler's injury and associated it with trauma. These dogs form intense bonds with their handlers. Seeing his human partner seriously hurt would explain the severe shutdown behaviors you've been addressing. Was his handler? I hesitated, unsure I wanted the answer. Staff Sergeant Morales survived, but required extensive rehabilitation. He's actually been leading the search for Ajax since being cleared for limited duty. He'll be relieved to know his partner has been found safe. The information reconfigured my understanding of Ghost's trauma, not witnessing a suicide as originally theorized, but experiencing a traumatic separation from a bonded handler, followed by weeks of struggle for survival. The fundamental story remained similar, but this context added dimensions to consider in his ongoing rehabilitation. What does this mean for his placement? I finally asked the question weighing most heavily. Calloway's expression softened slightly. Officially, Ajax remains military property, and standard protocol would involve returning him to the training center for reassessment and potential reassignment. My chest tightened at the clinical language: property, protocol, reassignment. Terms that failed to capture the complex being Ghost had revealed himself to be during our weeks together. However, she continued, noting my reaction, this situation has mitigating factors. The trauma he experienced has clearly affected his operational capabilities. The extensive rehabilitation you've provided represents significant investment in his recovery. And most importantly, the bond you've formed appears to be crucial to his continued progress. She reached into her bag, removing a folder containing official-looking documents. I've been authorized to discuss alternative arrangements that might better serve both Ajax's well-being and the program's interests. The conversation that followed outlined options I hadn't dared hope for. The possibility of a medical retirement for Ghost Ajax, conditional placement that would allow him to remain with me while maintaining limited connection to the program. For follow-up assessments, potential involvement in veteran therapy programs once his rehabilitation reached appropriate stability. Staff Sergeant Morales specifically requested we consider these alternatives, Calloway explained. He understands better than most how trauma affects these dogs and how important consistent support is to their recovery. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, we had established a provisional agreement. Ghost would remain in my care, while formal procedures for his medical retirement were processed. Calloway would return with Sergeant Morales when he was cleared for travel, allowing Ghost to reconnect with his former handler in a controlled setting while maintaining his current, stable placement. The military invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in Ajax's training, Calloway said as she prepared to leave. But Sergeant Morales made a good point in his recommendation, that investment is best honored by ensuring this dog recovers and has a meaningful life, even if that life looks different than originally intended. After she departed, I sat beside Ghost on the living room floor, processing the revelations and unexpected possibilities. He pressed against my side with the comfortable familiarity we had established, seemingly untroubled by the visit or the temporary resurfacing of his military identity. Ajax, huh? I said quietly, testing the name that had once been his. He glanced up, showing recognition, but not the enthusiastic response a beloved name typically triggers. I think you're Ghost now, I concluded. New life, new name. Ajax was who you were trained to be. Ghost is who you're choosing to become. He sighed deeply, settling his head on my knee in a gesture that had become his standard expression of contentment. The weight of his trust, hard-won through weeks of patient rehabilitation, felt simultaneously heavier and more precious with the knowledge that it might not have been temporary after all. That evening, I received an email from Dr. Winters. Her first communication since her hospitalization. She was recovering well, she wrote, and would resume limited sessions the following week. She asked how I had managed during the unplanned therapy break and whether Ghost's rehabilitation was continuing to provide positive structure. As I composed my response, detailing the developments of recent weeks, I realized how much had changed in my perspective since beginning this journey. The language I now used to describe both Ghost's progress and my own reflections contained nuance that had been absent before. Recognition of non-linear healing, appreciation for small victories, acknowledgement of ongoing challenges without dismissing genuine improvements. I had begun to develop what Dr. Winters had called recovery literacy, the vocabulary and conceptual framework to articulate healing as a complex, continuous process rather than a binary state of broken versus fixed. This evolving understanding applied not just to Ghost, but to my own journey through post-combat reintegration. The most significant realization, I wrote in conclusion, has been recognizing that recovery isn't about erasing trauma's effects, but about expanding life around them. Ghost still startles at sudden noises. I still struggle with hypervigilance in crowded places, but those responses no longer define our entire existence or limit our capacity for meaningful connection. As I sent the email, Ghost stirred from his evening rest and approached for his customary pre-bedtime check-in, a brief moment of eye contact that had evolved from hesitant glances to deliberate communication. In that simple exchange, I recognized what Erin had described weeks earlier as appropriate attachment, connection that balanced emotional bonding with individual resilience, interdependence rather than codependence. We had traveled far from our first encounter in that shelter kennel, where a withdrawn German shepherd refused to acknowledge human presence, and an isolated veteran recognized himself in that deliberate disengagement. The path hadn't been linear or perfect, with setbacks interspersed among progressions, but its direction remained consistently forward. Small victories accumulated into significant transformation. Ghost accepting touch during stressful situations, initiating play with a senior dog, maintaining calm during controlled public outings. Corresponding shifts in my own patterns had emerged alongside his progress: increased community engagement, expanded emotional vocabulary, gradual reconceptualization of recovery expectations. As we settled into our evening routine, ghost-taking, his customary position near my bedroom door, while I prepared for sleep, I reflected on Lieutenant Calloway's revelation about his original trauma. Not witnessing an owner's suicide as initially believed, but experiencing traumatic separation from a bonded handler. The corrected narrative didn't erase the impact of what he had endured, but it offered context that transformed understanding. In similar fashion, my own military experiences could be recontextualized without being diminished. The trauma remained real, its effects persistent, but its meaning and integration into my larger life story continued to evolve through connections like the one Ghost and I had formed, partnerships that honored difficult truths while building toward new possibilities. "Good night, Ghost," I said quietly as I turned out the light. "Tomorrow's another day forward." His tail thumped softly against the floor in response, a small sound in a quiet apartment, insignificant to anyone who hadn't witnessed the silence that preceded it. But to me, it echoed with the unmistakable rhythm of healing in progress, of life expanding beyond trauma's constraints, of small victories accumulating into profound transformation. One day at a time, one connection at a time, one step forward, then another. Staff Sergeant Luis Morales arrived on a Wednesday morning. In early June, the Pacific Northwest sunshine casting everything in uncharacteristic brightness. His appearance at my door was preceded by a phone call from Lieutenant Calloway, who had arranged the meeting with careful consideration for both Ghost's stability and Morales's expectations. "He understands this is primarily an informational visit," she had explained. "No decisions about permanent placement will be made today. This is about closure for both Ajax and his former handler." I had prepared meticulously, ensuring Ghost's morning included adequate exercise to reduce baseline anxiety without exhausting him. I positioned familiar comfort items throughout the apartment and reviewed calming techniques that had proven effective during previous stress events. Despite these preparations, tension knotted my shoulders as I opened the door to the man who had once been the center of Ghost's world. Staff Sergeant Morales stood with the distinctive posture of career military, spine straight, shoulders squared, presence deliberate without being imposing. More surprising was the walking cane he gripped in his right hand, evidence of the injuries Lieutenant Calloway had mentioned. His left cheek bore a significant scar that disappeared into his hairline, but his eyes were clear and focused as he extended his hand. Staff Sergeant Luis Morales, he introduced himself, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to command. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Michael Reeves, I replied, accepting his handshake. Former Marine Corps, now Ghost's foster. He nodded, acknowledging the military connection without commenting on it directly. Lieutenant Calloway explained the situation. I appreciate your willingness to include me in his recovery process. As I invited him inside, Ghost emerged from the bedroom where he had been resting, his typical response to unfamiliar visitors, maintaining distance until assessing their intent. He froze in the hallway, body suddenly rigid with recognition. Morales remained perfectly still near the entryway, making no move toward the dog, whose reaction confirmed his identity more definitively than any documentation could have. "Hey, partner," he said softly, the formal military bearing melting slightly around the edges. For several seconds, Ghost remained motionless, ears forward, eyes locked on Morales with an intensity I had never witnessed. Then, gradually, his body language shifted, not toward relaxation, but toward cautious approach, each step measured as if traversing uncertain terrain. When he reached a point approximately 5 feet from Morales, Ghost stopped again, nostrils flaring as he processed. Familiar scents now altered by medication, hospital environments, and months of separation. "He's processing changes in your biochemical signature," I explained, recognizing the behavior from training manuals. "Your scent would have changed during hospitalization and recovery." Morales nodded understanding. "May I use a command sequence? It might help him confirm identification." At my assent, he issued 3 commands in quick succession, the specialized Dutch instructions Lieutenant Calloway had demonstrated. Ghost's response was immediate but complex, body responding automatically to ingrained training, while his emotional state remained visibly conflicted, caught between conditioned compliance and traumatic association. "He's struggling with competing responses," I observed quietly. "I see that," Morales replied, matching my subdued tone. "The accident is still connected to me in his mind." Without attempting further commands, Morales slowly lowered himself to a seated position on the floor, reducing his physical presence and creating more equal positioning. The movement was clearly painful, his injured leg extending awkwardly as he settled against the wall. "Mind if we just sit a while?" he asked, though the question seemed directed as much to Ghost as to me. "Let him make his own decisions about engagement." I nodded, impressed by his intuitive understanding of Ghost's needs. We remained in this configuration for nearly 20 minutes, Morales seated near the entryway, Ghost maintaining his observation position in the middle of the living room, myself standing quietly nearby. No demands, no expectations, simply shared space and the opportunity for Ghost to process this unexpected reunion at his own pace. Finally, Ghost moved again, approaching Morales with continued caution but decreased tension. When he reached the seated man, he engaged in detailed scent investigation, nose working methodically along arms, legs, torso, cataloging changes while confirming core identity. "That's right, it's me," Morales said softly as Ghost completed his inspection. "Different parts, same person." The simple phrase carried layers of meaning applicable to both canine and human recovery, acknowledging fundamental change while affirming continuing selfhood. Different parts, same person, the essence preserved despite trauma's transformative effects. Ghost completed his investigation and sat directly in front of Morales, maintaining eye contact with newfound steadiness. He neither sought physical affection nor retreated to safer distance, simply established direct engagement with this person who represented both profound connection and traumatic severance. "Would it be all right if I offered him my hand?" Morales asked, respecting my position as Ghost's current handler. "Yes, but palm down rather than forward," I suggested. He's still reactive to gestures that might be perceived as reaching. Morales followed the guidance precisely, extending his hand palm downward at Ghost's eye level, neither reaching toward his head nor invading his space, simply offering connection if desired. Ghost held position for several seconds before leaning forward to make brief contact, nose touching knuckles in deliberate acknowledgement. "Thank you," Morales said, the simple phrase laden with emotion that disciplined military bearing couldn't entirely contain. We moved to the living room then, discussing Ghost's rehabilitation journey in professional terms that created necessary distance from the emotional complexities underlying our shared situation. Morales provided valuable context for Ghost's training, history, the specialized detection work he had been prepared for, the strong aptitude he had shown for scent discrimination, the behavioral indicators that had made him particularly valuable to the program. He was exceptional, Morales explained, not just technically proficient but intuitive. He could anticipate threat patterns before they fully developed. The information aligned with Ghost's heightened environmental awareness, his careful mapping of spaces, his sensitivity to subtle shifts in atmosphere or energy. Capabilities that had once been operational assets now manifested as trauma responses, hypervigilance rather than tactical advantage, anxiety rather than appropriate alertness. The accident happened during specialized night training, Morales continued, his gaze fixed on Ghost, who had settled at a middle distance, maintaining observation without demanding engagement. Rural road, heavy rain, a logging truck jackknifed ahead of us. Our vehicle rolled, trying to avoid collision. He touched his scarred cheek absently. I was trapped in the wreckage. Ajax was thrown clear, but sustained injuries. Last thing I remember is seeing him disoriented, blood on his coat, before I lost consciousness. The account provided crucial context for Ghost's psychological damage, the traumatic association between vehicles and danger, the connection between his bonded human and severe injury, the subsequent period of survival without support or guidance. His withdrawal at the shelter had been not just fear response, but grief behavior, mourning the handler he had no reason to believe had survived. Search teams looked for weeks, Morales said quietly. But without his tracking collar, which was damaged in the accident, Ajax was always exceptional at evasion training. Once he decided to avoid detection, his chance of recovery became minimal. The conversation shifted then to Ghost's current status, his physical rehabilitation progress, behavioral improvements, and continued challenges. I described his developing socialization, the carefully structured exposures we had implemented, the gradual expansion of his comfort with limited public interactions. "You've done remarkable work with him," Morales acknowledged, "far beyond standard rehabilitation protocols." "He's done the hard part," I replied honestly. "I've just provided consistent support while he rebuilds neural pathways." Morales smiled slightly at the technical description. "Military precision in civilian application, your background shows." The observation was accurate. I had approached Ghost's rehabilitation with the methodical thoroughness my Marine training had instilled, applying to canine psychology the same disciplined attention once directed toward mission parameters and tactical assessments. Our discussion turned eventually to the question neither of us had directly addressed: Ghost's permanent placement. Lieutenant Calloway had outlined the official options, but the emotional reality was more complex than administrative decisions could fully encompass. "I was his handler," Morales said finally, addressing the unspoken tension. "But my recovery hasn't progressed to the point where I could provide the stability he needs. My medical retirement is still being processed, housing situation temporary, physical therapy ongoing for at least another year." He glanced at Ghost, who had drifted closer during our conversation, now positioned where he could maintain visual contact with both humans. More importantly, he's formed a critical bond with you. Breaking that connection now could trigger significant regression. The assessment was clinically accurate, but didn't fully acknowledge the emotional component evident in Morales' expression when he looked at the dog who had once been his constant companion. Despite professional detachment, the severed connection clearly represented profound personal loss. I was thinking, I began carefully, that Ghost's rehabilitation might benefit from maintaining connections to both familiar attachment figures. Once he's stabilized further, perhaps regular visits could be integrated into his routine. Morales looked up sharply, unexpected hope briefly visible before professional composure returned. That would be unorthodox from a military working dog perspective. This entire situation is unorthodox, I pointed out. Ghost isn't functioning as military working dog anymore. He's rebuilding his capacity for normal canine behavior and appropriate attachment. Having connection to both his past and present might actually create more stability than forcing an either-or decision. The suggestion hung between us, a potential bridge across competing needs and responsibilities. Ghost, seemingly sensing the significance of our discussion, moved to position himself precisely between us, physically manifesting the connection being negotiated. "I'd like that," Morales said finally, "if you're open to it and if his progress indicates he can handle the complexity." We spent the remainder of the visit discussing practical implementation, how to structure initial shared activities, appropriate timeframes for gradually increasing interaction, protocols for addressing any stress responses that might emerge. The conversation had shifted from theoretical possibilities to concrete planning, tacit acknowledgement that Ghost's future would include both of us in carefully coordinated roles. As Morales prepared to leave, Ghost initiated physical contact for the first time, approaching his former handler and briefly pressing against his leg in the subtle connection gesture he had developed during our time together. The movement wasn't dramatic or demonstrative, but its significance wasn't lost on either of us. "He's learning to rebuild trust," I observed quietly. "Teaching us both how," Morales replied, gently resting his hand on Ghost's back for a brief moment. After he departed, Ghost maintained heightened alertness, periodically checking the door as if confirming whether Morales might return. His behavior showed no signs of regression or distress, merely processing, integrating this new development into his gradually expanding understanding of his current reality. That evening I received a call from Dr. Winters, confirming our session scheduled for the following day, my first since her hospitalization and the unexpected developments in Ghost's situation. "Looking forward to catching up," she said. "Sounds like significant progress has occurred in multiple dimensions." The observation was accurate beyond its immediate reference to Ghost's rehabilitation. The past weeks had brought evolution not just in Ghost's recovery, but in my own relationship to community, purpose, and future orientation. The fostering arrangement that had begun as structured therapy compliance had transformed into genuine connection, not just with Ghost, but with the network of support that had developed around his rehabilitation. Dr. Winters noted the change. Immediately when I arrived at her office the next day, her experienced clinical eye registering subtle shifts in posture, eye contact, and conversational engagement before I had even settled into my usual chair. "You seem more present," she observed. "After initial greetings, more embodied in your experience rather than dissociated from it." The assessment was startlingly accurate. Throughout my early treatment, dissociation had been a primary concern, my tendency to observe my life from emotional distance rather than fully inhabiting its moments. The defense mechanism had served crucial purpose during combat deployment, but had become maladaptive in civilian recovery. Ghost requires complete presence, I explained. He reads micro-expressions, body language, voice tonality. If I'm not fully engaged in our interactions, he immediately detects the incongruence and responds with increased anxiety. Dr. Winters nodded understanding. The relationship creates feedback loop that reinforces authentic presence. His needs have essentially prescribed precisely what your recovery required. We discussed the revelations about Ghost's military background, the introduction of Sergeant Morales into his rehabilitation process, and the proposed shared custody arrangement being developed. Dr. Winters listened attentively, occasionally, making notes, but primarily maintaining the engaged presence that characterized her therapeutic approach. "What interests me most," she commented after I had outlined recent developments, "is how you've navigated the uncertainty. Previous situations involving similar levels of unpredictability typically triggered significant anxiety responses." Her observation prompted reflection on the different quality of my engagement with recent challenges. The unexpected discoveries about Ghost's history, the potential custody complications, the introduction of new relationship dynamics, each represented precisely the type of uncontrolled variables that had previously overwhelmed my coping resources. "I think it's about perspective," I ventured after considering her point. "Before, uncertainty meant potential threat. Now it's just complexity to be navigated. Not necessarily dangerous, just requiring adaptation." "That's an extremely significant cognitive shift," Dr. Winters noted. "From binary threat assessment to nuanced engagement with complexity. Do you have thoughts about what facilitated that change?" The question deserved careful consideration. What had changed wasn't my external circumstances, but my relationship to them, my capacity to tolerate ambiguity without immediate categorization as threat or safety. Ghost needed me to be stable even when situations weren't, I said finally. His rehabilitation required me to provide consistent presence during unpredictable events. Being that anchor for him somehow helped me find it for myself. Our session continued with exploration of this evolving capacity for presence amidst uncertainty, a fundamental skill for civilian reintegration after combat deployment, where hypervigilance creates illusion of control through constant threat. Assessment. The capacity to remain engaged without exhaustive environmental scanning represented crucial progress in recalibrating my nervous system for civilian functioning. Over the following weeks, we implemented the shared connection plan, developed with Sergeant Morales. Initial interactions took place in neutral locations, quiet parks, uncrowded hiking trails, where Ghost could engage with both attachment figures without territorial complications. These structured activities gradually increased in duration and complexity, carefully monitored for any signs of stress or confusion. To our collective surprise, Ghost showed remarkable capacity for navigating the complex social arrangement. Rather than experiencing divided loyalty or attachment confusion, he seemed to integrate both connections into an expanded support network, turning to me for daily structure and consistency while developing renewed but evolved relationship with Morales. "Dogs are actually well adapted for community-based attachment," Erin explained during one of our progress assessments. "In natural settings, canines form bonds with multiple pack members, each serving different functions within the social structure. Our tendency to isolate them in single-family units is the unnatural arrangement, not your shared custody approach." The perspective reframed what might have seemed like complicated circumstances into something aligned with Ghost's inherent social capacities. The arrangement benefited all parties involved, providing Ghost with expanded support, offering Morales connection to his former partner while honoring his current limitations, and allowing me continued relationship with the being who had become central to my own recovery journey. July brought record heat to the Pacific Northwest, temperatures climbing into the 90s for consecutive days. Ghost struggled with the extreme weather, his thick coat and remaining anxiety making temperature regulation challenging. We adjusted our routines accordingly, exercising during early morning hours, utilizing cooling mats and specialized vests during necessary outings, focusing on indoor enrichment activities during peak heat periods. During one particularly sweltering afternoon, as Ghost lay on his cooling mat while a floor fan created artificial breeze, I received an unexpected call from Lieutenant Calloway. "Just checking in on Ajax's Ghost's progress," she explained after initial greetings. "The paperwork for his medical retirement is nearly complete. There's one additional matter I wanted to discuss with you, if you have a moment." The formal, tone-triggered momentary tension, concern that bureaucratic complications might disrupt the functioning arrangement we had established. "Of course," I replied, moving to the kitchen where I could speak without disturbing Ghost's rest. "Our K9 training center is developing a new program," Calloway explained, her voice warming slightly as she moved from official communication to personal engagement. A rehabilitation initiative focused specifically on service dogs affected by trauma, both military working dogs and civilian service animals injured in the line of duty. The concept immediately captured my interest, combining specialized knowledge of working dog psychology with rehabilitation approaches typically reserved for companion animals. "Sounds like an important innovation," I commented. "The needs are significantly different from standard rescue rehabilitation." "Exactly," Calloway confirmed, "and that's actually why I'm calling." The program director reviewed Ghost's progress reports and was extremely impressed with the rehabilitation protocol you've implemented. She's interested in consulting with you as the program develops, perhaps even having you observe some initial assessments and provide feedback on proposed protocols. The invitation was unexpected, but immediately compelling, an opportunity to translate our specific experience into broader application, potentially benefiting other dogs navigating similar trauma recovery journeys. "I'd be interested," I replied, surprised by my own immediate certainty, though I should clarify that my approach has been largely intuitive rather than formally structured. I've adapted standard protocols based on Ghost's specific responses rather than following established methodology. "That's precisely what interests her," Calloway explained. "The individualized approach you've developed addresses gaps in standard rehabilitation programs. Your background provides unique perspective on the intersection between human and canine trauma responses." We arranged a preliminary meeting for the following week, discussing basic parameters while leaving detailed planning for direct conversation with the program director. After ending the call, I returned to the living room, where Ghost had roused from his heat-induced lethargy and was watching me with characteristic attentiveness. "Apparently we might have expertise to share," I told him, settling beside his cooling mat. "Who would have thought?" The prospect of contributing to a specialized rehabilitation program represented significant evolution in my own recovery journey, from focusing exclusively on personal stability to considering how that hard-won knowledge might benefit others navigating similar terrain. The shift from inward orientation to outward engagement marked another milestone in reintegration. I shared the development with Sergeant Morales during our scheduled hiking excursion the following day. Ghost trotted ahead of us on the shaded trail, periodically circling back to check our position before resuming his exploration, a behavior that balanced independent investigation with maintained connection. "The program sounds promising," Morales commented after hearing the details. "Military working dogs experience unique trauma profiles that standard rehabilitation approaches don't adequately address. I've been thinking about specific protocols that might bridge the gap," I replied, finding unexpected enthusiasm in the topic. Integrating aspects of tactical retraining with trauma-sensitive handling, essentially acknowledging the specialized conditioning without triggering associated stress responses. Morales nodded thoughtfully, creating transitional framework between operational functionality and civilian adaptation. That's essentially what military personnel need during reintegration as well. The parallel wasn't lost on either of us. The similarities between canine and human transitions from combat conditioning to civilian functioning. Different neurological systems, but comparable challenges in recalibrating threat assessment, sensory, processing, and social engagement. Would you consider consulting as well? I asked, the idea forming as I spoke. Your perspective as handler would add dimension my fostering experience can't provide. Morales considered the proposal as we paused at a viewpoint overlooking the valley below. Ghost positioned himself between us, alert but relaxed, exemplifying the balanced vigilance that had replaced his earlier hyper-arousal. I'd like that. Morales decided, might help other handlers understand the recovery process from both sides of the leash. The conversation shifted then to practical planning, how our complementary experiences might inform program development, specific aspects of military working dog training that required specialized rehabilitation approaches, potential assessment, tools for evaluating trauma, impact on working dog functionality. As we discussed these professional considerations, I became aware of subtle but significant shift in my own self-concept, from passive recipient of recovery services to active contributor with valuable expertise. The perspective transformation represented crucial milestone in post-military identity development, bridging the gap between who I had been as a Marine and who I was becoming as a civilian. This evolution continued during my next session with Dr. Winters, where our conversation focused less on symptom management and more on future orientation, career possibilities, community engagement, expanded relationship capacity. You're transitioning from surviving to thriving, she observed near the session's conclusion. From crisis management to purpose development, that's the trajectory we hope for but can't force. It emerges organically when foundational stability has been established. The assessment aligned with my own internal experience, a gradual shift from moment-to-moment coping to longer-term planning, from reactive existence to proactive engagement. The change hadn't occurred through deliberate effort, but through accumulated small choices, each building upon the previous until a new pattern emerged. August brought milder temperatures and expanded socialization opportunities for Ghost. His confidence in public settings had increased steadily, allowing longer outings and more complex environments. We began volunteering at a local veterans center, where Ghost's calm presence and intuitive responsiveness to emotional states made him welcome during support group meetings and individual counseling sessions. His capacity to detect rising anxiety before obvious manifestations proved particularly valuable in trauma support contexts. Several times during group sessions, Ghost preemptively approached veterans showing subtle signs of distress, slight changes in breathing pattern, micro-expressions of emotional dysregulation, altered scent profiles, imperceptible to human awareness but clearly detectable to his sensitive olfactory system. "He knows before I do," one veteran commented after. Ghost had positioned himself beside his chair during an intensifying discussion about combat experiences. "Somehow, he senses when I'm starting to disconnect." This natural ability to detect and respond to psychological distress represented potential beyond our current volunteer activities. When the center's director approached me about formal therapy, dog certification, I found myself considering possibilities that would have seemed inconceivable months earlier. Structured community service, professional development, purposeful engagement with others, navigating trauma recovery. Ghost has the temperament and intuitive capability, she explained. With his background and your combined experiences, you could provide unique support for veterans struggling with reintegration. The suggestion required careful consideration, balancing Ghost's continued rehabilitation needs with potential service opportunities, ensuring that helping others didn't compromise his own recovery. Progress. I discussed the possibility with Erin, Sergeant Morales, and Dr. Winters, gathering diverse perspectives before making decisions about this potential new direction. The key consideration is whether the activity supports his healing or depletes it, Erin advised during our consultation. Some rehabilitating dogs find purpose in service work that actually accelerates their recovery. Others need more time focused exclusively on their own healing before taking on others' emotional needs. After thorough assessment of Ghost's current stability and careful introduction to increasingly complex veteran center environments, we collectively determined that limited structured therapy work aligned with his rehabilitation trajectory rather than compromising it. The engagement provided mental stimulation, purpose-directed activity, and controlled socialization, all beneficial components of his continued recovery. By mid-August, Ghost had begun formal therapy dog training, specialized preparation that built upon his military background while redirecting those capabilities toward civilian support functions. His progress surprised even experienced trainers, who commented on his exceptional emotional intelligence and intuitive understanding of human psychological states. He reads micro-expressions better than most people, his primary trainer observed during a session focused on recognizing anxiety signals. The military training gave him the observation skills, but something else gives him the empathy to respond appropriately rather than just detecting the change. That something else was the essence of Ghost himself, the quality of being that had persisted beneath trauma's overlay, the fundamental character that rehabilitation had uncovered rather than created. His capacity for connection had never been destroyed, merely buried beneath protective adaptations that had once been necessary for survival. As summer transitioned toward fall, Ghost's formal assessment for therapy dog certification approached. A structured evaluation of his temperament, responsiveness, and public behavior stability. While his progress suggested readiness for this milestone, I found myself experiencing unexpected anxiety as the evaluation date drew closer. During our weekly session, Dr. Winters helped me examine the source of this concern. Perhaps the certification represents more than just Ghost's progress, she suggested. It symbolizes transition from rehabilitation to new purpose for both of you. The insight illuminated the deeper significance behind my surface anxiety. Ghost's certification would mark transformation from trauma survivor to purposeful contributor. A journey parallel to my own gradual shift from passive recovery to active engagement. The evaluation represented not just his capabilities, but the distance we had traveled together from that first encounter at the shelter. On certification day, Ghost demonstrated remarkable composure throughout the multi-phase assessment, navigating crowded environments with calm alertness, responding appropriately to unexpected stimuli, maintaining focused connection despite distractions, and demonstrating the specialized anxiety response behaviors we had refined during training. "He's a natural," the evaluator commented as she completed her assessment forms. The military background actually enhances his therapy potential. He notices subtle changes in human presentation that most dogs miss entirely. Ghost received his certification with the same quiet dignity that characterized his approach to life's challenges and victories. The simple vest indicating his therapy dog status seemed to me profound recognition of his journey from traumatized shelter dog without identity to specialized service animal with renewed purpose. That evening, sharing the accomplishment with Sergeant Morales during his regular visit, I reflected on the parallel paths that had brought us all to this unexpected intersection. A German shepherd reclaiming purpose after trauma, a former handler finding new relationship with his canine partner, a Marine veteran discovering bridge between military identity and civilian contribution. Did you ever imagine this outcome when they first told you Ajax had been found? I asked, as Ghost moved comfortably between us in my living room, accepting attention from both with equal ease. Morales shook his head, watching Ghost with evident pride. I hoped he was alive somewhere, but this... He gestured to encompass the apartment, the therapy vest hanging near the door, the easy comfort of our shared space. This is beyond what I could have envisioned. For any of us, I agreed. As Ghost settled on his bed, positioned where he could maintain visual connection with both humans while resting comfortably, I recognized the profound symmetry in our collective journey. Three beings shaped by trauma had discovered not just recovery but transformation, not merely returning to previous states, but evolving into new versions of ourselves, versions that incorporated hard-earned wisdom alongside renewed capacity for purposeful engagement. The German shepherd who had once refused to acknowledge human presence now facilitated healing connections between trauma survivors. The handler who had lost his working partner had found new relationship beyond operational parameters. And I, who had once retreated from meaningful connection, had discovered purpose in building bridges between past and present, between military and civilian identities, between trauma and recovery. Ghost's story was far from complete. Rehabilitation would continue with occasional setbacks amid ongoing progress. But what had once been primarily rehabilitation had evolved into something richer. A life expanding beyond trauma's constraints, finding purpose in connection rather than isolation. As twilight gathered outside my apartment windows, Ghost opened his eyes briefly, confirming our continued presence before returning to peaceful rest. The simple gesture contained all that needed to be said about our journey together. Trust established, safety created, connection maintained across circumstances neither of us could have anticipated when our paths first crossed. If he charges me, so be it. I've stared down worse in Fallujah, I had told the shelter worker on that first day, never imagining how those words would prove both accurate and insufficient. I had indeed faced worse in combat, but that comparison missed the essential truth that healing often arrives in unexpected forms, that wounded beings recognize each other across species boundaries, that recovery happens not in dramatic moments but in quiet acts of daily courage. The German shepherd who refused to look at anyone had become the therapy dog who saw what others missed. And in that transformation lay the most profound lesson of all, that trauma may alter paths but need not determine destinations. That purpose can emerge from pain when connection replaces isolation. That seeing and being seen represent the most fundamental healing of all. The Pacific Northwest autumn arrived with characteristic graduality, temperatures easing rather than plummeting, rain increasing in frequency, but not yet delivering the sustained downpours of winter. Ghost adapted to the changing season with remarkable flexibility, his thick coat better suited to cooling temperatures than summer heat. Our morning routine expanded to include longer trails, now comfortable for extended exploration, his confidence in varied environments growing alongside. His physical stamina. October marked 6 months since our first encounter at the shelter, a milestone that prompted reflection on the distance we had traveled together. The withdrawn German Shepherd, who had refused eye contact, now worked weekly at the Veterans Center, intuitive awareness of emotional states making him exceptionally effective in supporting group sessions. Though still selective with physical affection, he had developed meaningful connections beyond our primary bond, recognizing Sergeant Morales, Erin, and several regular therapy clients as trusted individuals deserving of engagement. My own transformation paralleled his in ways both obvious and subtle. Physically, I had regained weight lost during depressive periods before Ghost's arrival, muscle tone returning through our daily hikes and training sessions. Sleep quality had improved substantially, hypervigilance gradually yielding to more appropriate alertness. Most significantly, social engagement had expanded from minimal necessity to meaningful connection, my world no longer constrained by trauma's invisible boundaries. This progress came into sharp focus during my monthly session with Dr. Winters, who had begun transitioning our work from crisis management to long-term well-being development. "I'd like to discuss future planning," she suggested after reviewing recent experiences, "not just weeks ahead, but months, potentially years. Your capacity for forward projection has significantly improved." The suggestion would have triggered immediate anxiety 6 months earlier, future orientation requiring psychological resources I hadn't possessed. Now, I found myself considering the proposition with cautious interest, rather than automatic resistance. "What aspects of future planning do you have in mind?" I asked. "Professional development, housing stability, relationship capacity," she replied, "areas where short-term coping has sustainably shifted toward longer-term growth." Our conversation explored these dimensions thoughtfully, identifying potential directions without artificial urgency. The volunteer work with the K9 Rehabilitation Program had evolved into part-time consultation. My experience with Ghost providing valuable perspective on specialized trauma recovery approaches. This professional engagement, combined with continuing Veterans Center involvement, had created foundation for potential career development rather than merely stopgap employment. The VA has grant funding for veteran-led PTSD service dog training, Dr. Winters mentioned. Your combined military background and rehabilitation experience with Ghost would make you an exceptionally qualified candidate for program development. The possibility resonated unexpectedly, connecting threads of experience that had previously seemed disparate: military service, trauma recovery, canine rehabilitation, veteran community engagement. A potential vocational path that incorporated rather than rejected my past while opening toward meaningful future. "I'd like to explore that," I acknowledged, the ready response surprising us both with its clarity. "What strikes me most," Dr. Winters observed, "is your capacity to envision purpose beyond survival. 6 months ago, daily functioning consumed available resources. Now you're considering how your experience might benefit others in similar circumstances." This observation captured essential shift in my recovery journey, from inward focus necessitated by acute trauma management to outward engagement made possible by stabilized foundation. Ghost had been both catalyst and companion in this transition, his needs providing structure, while his progress offered tangible evidence that healing, however nonlinear, was genuinely possible. That evening, I shared these reflections with Sergeant Morales during his regular visit. Ghost moved comfortably between us as we discussed the potential service dog training program, his relaxed presence physical embodiment of our successful shared custody arrangement. "The military actually approached me about something similar," Morales revealed. "They're developing a veteran handler transition program, placing retired working dogs with former handlers navigating medical retirement. Asked if I'd consider consulting based on our situation with Ghost. The synchronicity seemed fitting rather than coincidental, parallel opportunities emerging from our interconnected journeys. Neither of us had anticipated these possibilities when Ghost's identity was first discovered, yet they emerged organically from the adaptive solutions we had developed together. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.